Welcome to People in Profit. I'm Stephen Carroll. This week, we're focusing on the United States economy ahead of the presidential election coming up. It's the world's economic powerhouse, but after the coronavirus recession, what will the American economy look like for the next administration? Hey, big spenders, we delve into the candidates' promises on tax and public spending. Plus, far from the campaign trail, the basic income project in Compton that could make a big difference in a place where poverty is double the national average. Now, the United States presidential election is a vote with global consequences, many of them economic. What happens to the US economy has an impact far beyond its borders. America is the biggest buyer of exported goods from other countries, totaling almost $2.6 trillion last year. Now, like everywhere else, the COVID-19 pandemic has hit the United States hard. The International Monetary Fund expects the economy to shrink by more than 4% this year, with a smaller bounce back in 2021. The unemployment rate in September was just under 8%. Well, to talk more about the state of the American economy, we're joined now by the economist Megan Green, who's currently a senior fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School. Megan, thanks very much for being with us. I'd like to start by going back in time with you to before the pandemic struck. What sort of state was the US economy in before all of this happened?
So before the virus hit, the U.S. economy was running a little bit above potential growth. So it was in decent shape, but the Fed had kept rates really low. And we economists were actually trying to read the tea leaves to figure out what might spark the next recession. We thought that we'd have to really search high and low to figure out the next trigger. We just didn't realize it would come and hit us all in the face. But the external environment actually wasn't very positive. So China had some pretty scary economic data coming out around the turn of the year. France wasn't looking great. Germany had just barely skirted a recession. Italy was back in recession. So the external environment for the U.S. wasn't looking fantastic. And U.S. growth was kind of trundling along, but wasn't looking particularly fantastic. And most economists thought a recession might come this year, but no one could really explain what might trigger it.
So how much of that state had been contributed to by policies that were implemented under President Trump?
So I'd say that the economy was running a little bit hot. So it was running a bit ahead of potential growth, in part because of the tax cuts that Trump had implemented and major spending bills that Trump had passed, and also as a result of deregulation. So there was some juice in the economy because of policy. I would say the vast majority of it, though, really wasn't coming from the White House at all. It was coming much more from the central bank, which had started to hike rates and then reverse course pretty abruptly and then cut rates back down so that monetary policy was incredibly easy and accommodative. And I think that's really helped the economy because it's made credit incredibly cheap. And so what we saw even before this crisis hit was companies had just leveraged up massively. They borrowed a ton because borrowing was so cheap. And that kept the economy going. So I would say that the U.S. economy was looking decent. Sure, the White House had something to do with it, but mainly I would say that's down to policies of the central bank.
So let's fast forward then to where we are today. How badly has the US economy been hit by the coronavirus crisis?
Well, the initial decline was precipitous in the U.S. as the rest of the world, but the bounce back has been really strong as well. That doesn't bring us back to where we were before the virus hit, though. And I would say that I look at this economic experience as kind of a tragedy in three parts. So you have the huge decline, the big bounce back, and that's caused a lot of people to say we must have a V-shaped recovery. But the third act is the act we're just starting now, and that's the long, hard slog. It's a lot harder to get the last 20% of workers back into jobs than it was to get the first 20% of workers into jobs. And in the absence of more fiscal stimulus, I think it's going to be even harder. So most of the support in the U.S. that was provided by Congress expired at the end of July or beginning of August. And so businesses and consumers are basically just running down the savings that they had socked away with the initial stimulus. That can't last forever. And so, I think the longer that we wait for another fiscal stimulus in the U.S., the bigger it's going to have to be, particularly as we head into winter and a resurgence of the virus and potential local lockdowns in the U.S.
So what's going to be the biggest challenge then facing the winner of this election? Is it going to be getting that stimulus done? Do you think we'll have a stimulus package in place before January?
So we could, and it's hard to say who exactly is to blame for the stimulus not being re-upped faster. We will get a stimulus package after the election. It's not clear whether it will happen before the end of the year, though. That all depends on the politics and the horse trading that will have to happen as part of the stimulus bill. And I think that will be determined by the outcome of the election. So we'll see, but we'll definitely get something. It's just a question of exactly when.
So when it comes to the economy, what's the biggest priority then for the next president?
So I think the immediate priority will be managing the virus and reflating the economy. What we've seen in the U.S. is that it's not actually government policy about whether you can go out or not that determines people's behavior. It's whether people actually feel confident about going out and having that not land them up in the hospital. If they don't feel like they can go out without getting sick, people just won't do it, whatever the government's saying. And so as we're facing into winter and we're seeing a resurgence in cases, I think it will be a huge priority for the new president to try to get a handle on the virus and to try to instill confidence in the economy. I mean, I also think alongside that, the new president will need to reflate the economy. In addition to an immediate stimulus package that Congress will have to agree, I think it should be the priority for the new president to come up with other measures to go ahead and boost the economy that address the immediate crisis, but also take a longer-term view. So a Biden presidency has promised to provide, huge amounts of stimulus measures, $7 trillion in about 10 years. And there's a lot of proposals on the table that are aimed at things like infrastructure spending to retool the economy for sustainability and climate change, which will create a bunch of good jobs, upgrade the labor force in the U.S., which is badly needed, and it's badly needed right now. And it will also retool the economy so that it can sustain the next crisis. So I think that will be a priority as well.
Okay, Megan Green, Senior Fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School. Thank you very much for joining us. Kate Moody's been taking a closer look at the economic promises made by the two candidates. Kate, let's start with one of the areas where they differ the most, taxes. Where does Donald Trump stand on that issue?
Well, he wants to build on one of the cornerstones of his administration so far, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, which reduced both personal and corporate tax rates. It expires in 2025, but he'd like to extend it. That would roughly double the estimated $1.5 trillion in lost government revenue. He argues that that's actually balanced out by more economic activity.
What does Joe Biden have to say about taxes?
Well, Joe Biden would like to roll back a lot of those tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans and for the biggest corporations. He says the middle class and small and medium-sized companies would not be affected. His tax proposals would add around $4 trillion to government revenue by 2030. The Republican ticket, meanwhile, has floated the idea of reducing a tax on capital gains. That's applied to things like profits from stock market or real estate investments, while the Democratic challengers want to raise it for the top earners.
Healthcare, another economically important area, and the candidates have radically different proposals there.
Both of them center around the Obama administration's Affordable Care Act. Trump has for years vowed to scrap it, while Biden would expand it. The incumbent president has yet to outline a healthcare plan of his own, although his latest budget reduces funding for Medicare and Medicaid, the government health programs for senior citizens and low-income Americans, as well as for the health department. He's also said he'll work to reduce drug prices and could issue an executive order to force insurers to cover pre-existing conditions. Biden, meanwhile, wants to lower the eligibility age for Medicare to 60, limit insurance costs to 8.5% of income, and create a public health insurance option, which would cover around 97% of the American population.
Give us a flavour of some of the other headlines from the campaigns.
Well, both of them support infrastructure spending bills of over $1 trillion. It's one of the few areas that has real bipartisan support. Biden supports doubling the minimum wage to $15 per hour. Trump says he would consider that if he's reelected. Trump's trade war with China has pushed the trade deficit between the superpowers down, at least in 2019. Biden favors international cooperation over unilateral tariffs to resolve trade disputes. When it comes to student debt, Trump wants to replace 4 income-linked payment programs with a single flat rate, while Biden has called for more debt forgiveness. The candidates are almost diametrically opposed on climate change as well. While Trump has rolled back environmental protections, Biden's campaign would spend $2 trillion to help cap emissions and promote clean energy sources.
Kate Moody, thank you. Now, while the presidential campaign has been playing out, local authorities in the United States have also been taking steps to help people hit by the pandemic. In the Californian city of Compton, rising unemployment is adding to an already high poverty rate. In response, the city is trying out a guaranteed minimum income for 800 residents, funded by private donations. Sharon Gaffney has the story.
1 in 5 residents of the Californian city of Compton lives below the poverty line. That's double the US national average. A new no-strings-attached cash payment scheme is being launched in a bid to help some of the lowest income earners in Compton.
What we're looking to do with the Compton Pledge is provide families with a predictable, supportive income over a 2-year period to help several hundred families just get through month to month.
An increasing number of families here are falling into poverty. The COVID-19 pandemic has raised the city's unemployment rate, which now stands at almost 22%.
I'm taking it. I love it because we are broke, pandemic going on. And I know a lot of families are out here struggling, so guaranteed money will be great.
This would be a big blessing, a big, major blessing to the city of Compton.
We definitely need it, man. A lot of people really suffered during this pandemic, man. People ain't able to get back, where they were before.
The scheme is entirely privately funded, with the organisers having raised to date over $2.5 million in donations.
That's it from us for now. Of course, we'll have full coverage of the election results here on France 24. In the meantime, you can find us on social media for your comments and questions. Until next time, thanks for watching.
From North to South Africa, from Bamako to Nairobi, from Accra to Mogadishu. Bringing you all the political, economic, cultural and social news from Africa for a better insight into an ever-changing continent.
Across Africa, presented by Georgia Calvin-Smith on France 24 and France24.com.